What if I told you there was a version of my game that was never released to the public? But why is that? Well, it's because it was never finished. Woo! Alright. Easy video. Hi, I'm Nathan, and for real, this devlog will be covering the unreleased version of my game, Soul 2.0. As we were working on previous versions of the game, we had known for a while that Soul had some major problems with it, along with things that we just didn't like. So the goal of Soul 2.0 was to start from the ground up and change everything to fix them. This was around the same time we came out with our design philosophy for the game, and we tried our best to follow these guidelines to make a new version of the game. However, there were some parts that we failed to do so, and some we succeeded. So let's talk about these changes and see what we can learn. The first major change we're going to talk about is the trait system, which for the most part just introduced more traits and allowing more diversity and options. For those unfamiliar with the trait system, it was a skill tree system of sorts that allowed you to pick different bonuses based on your stat level. For the new system, under each stat category, strength, agility, endurance, and intelligence, were new subcategories. 4 subcategories for each this time instead of the old system, which had 5. However, instead of having 15 total traits, there were now 20. This is because each subcategory reached tier 5, which allowed for more options for every character at higher levels. The subcategories were also tailored to each stat compared to the old system, which had subcategories that were basically catch-alls for different playstyles. With the new system, strength had subcategories might, which dealt with damage buffs, finesse, which dealt with hit rate, force, generally dealing more with range damage, and accuracy dealing with weapon range. Agility, which had precision, which dealt with hit rate for range attacks. There were also the categories stealth, evasion, and mobility, which are pretty self-explanatory. Endurance had fortitude, which dealt with armor. Restoration dealt with health. Integrity dealt with more tank-based utility abilities. And vigor dealt with healing. And lastly, intelligence had luck, which gave buffs to dice, focus, which dealt more with resource regeneration, efficiency gave more utility for casters, and relief made healing more likely to be successful. The addition of these options, along with making subcategories more closely tied to the stat, felt like a good change. I would love to go over each and every trait, but there are 80 of them, and that seems like a lot to go over in one video. So if you want to compare them, I'll be throwing both versions up on the Discord server, and you can let me know what you think. But that being said, I imagine this system will be completely changed in the new version, as there's a lot of other systems changing around it, and I guess we'll see. Secondly, there was a new concentration system, which was originally a pool of points that allowed you to use certain abilities, much like a mana system would in a video game. The biggest issue with the old system was its slow regen, which made it feel like you couldn't use abilities as frequently as I would have liked, and keeping track of these numbers was a bit of a hassle and always felt like it could be more streamlined. To fix this, we changed concentration to an action point-based system. A player was given 3 concentration at the start of combat. Each concentration could be used as its own action, or be used with abilities. Abilities could cost any number of concentration, which helped to balance more powerful abilities and give them more interesting options. For instance, a DJ could use their Drop the Base ability, which costs 3 concentration, or they could use 3 basic attacks with their weapon for 1 concentration each. After a player used their concentration, it would regenerate 1 per turn, unless they had a trait or skill which allowed it to regenerate faster. This helped to balance the game further, allowing more powerful abilities to not be used every turn, but still frequently enough to feel impactful. Again, I think this system was an overall improvement, and helped the game feel more like what we were going for. I think the only downside would be with having a player have this many actions, it could make turns take a while, but I think the positive outweigh the negative. So if both of these systems are improvements, why was the game not released? Well, that leads us to our last section of this video, the classes. Even though we hadn't actually finished this version of the game, the classes were basically done. The only thing that was actually missing was putting these designs onto actual cards, instead of using Tabletop Simulator's index cards. We developed all the abilities for 26 different classes, most of which were reworks of old classes, but there were also some additional classes that were never seen before, such as the Gunslinger, Fencer, Bulwark, Keeper, Drunk, Hunter, Nanomancer, Magnetist, Mentalist, and Mixologist. Well, the structure of each of these classes was relatively the same, with 5 abilities per class. The biggest change was the addition of what were called class passives, which is a misleading name for them, as some of them were actually active abilities, so we're just going to go ahead and call them signature abilities. This is an ability that came with acquiring a class that helped to inform its playstyle. For example, the Hunter signature ability was Animal Companion, which gave you a pet that fought alongside you. This ability would then play with other abilities in their kit, such as Tag Team, which allowed you and your companion to make a simultaneous attack, allowing your companion's attack to ignore evade, or like Bonded, which allowed you or your companion to make a basic action if the other landed a successful attack. Some of the original classes gained signature abilities that were existing abilities from their kit, such as the Mad Scientist's Malpractice ability, which allowed you to use healing tools to deal damage or weapons to heal, or the Robotics Engineer's Construct Robot, which we talked excessively about in the last video, but this allows them to, well, construct a robot, which then worked well with all their other abilities, similarly to the Hunter. Some of the other old classes got completely new signature abilities, such as the DJ's Tranquility, which applied all your passives to nearby allies within movement distance. Overall, these signature abilities I think were a great idea. The problem is a good portion of these classes conflicted directly with our design philosophy, most notably the importance of narrative and avoiding game mechanics that heavily used math. The Doctor being a prime example of this. Their signature ability was called Vaccinations, which allowed any target they healed to gain +1 movement distance. This was cool, but in practice a nightmare to keep track of. So you have 3 different allies you're healing. Ally 1 might have +2 movement, Ally 2 might have +1 movement, Ally 3 might have +3 movement, and it just gets confusing. This ability is something that would work well in a video game, but doesn't seem really practical for a tabletop game. The computer specialists basically have the same signature ability, except it slowed enemies instead of increasing speed on allies, so this didn't really work either. A lot of these abilities just felt too gamey for the lack of a better term, along with them being heavily combat focused. I'll be honest, I went into this video thinking these abilities were much worse than they were, and was prepared to pick them apart. However, after reviewing them, I learned the problem wasn't as much to do with the abilities themselves, but actually a problem with the structure of the classes and the lack of number of abilities per class. With only 5 abilities per class, we were forced to make each ability play the best it could into the kit, which restricted our ability to add more non-combat abilities or more roleplay focused ones. Let's take the Nomad for example. Their signature ability was called Combo, which allowed the Nomad to refund its concentration cost if it performed the ability successfully. Additionally, it allowed the last ability in the combo to be a finishing move. These abilities were Forceful Fist, which allowed the attack to ignore armor. If it was a finisher, it could also ignore shields. Roundhouse, which kicked an enemy back and dealt damage, the finisher knocking them back more spaces. Haymaker, dealing damage to enemies next to your target, whereas the finisher dealt damage to all enemies around your target. Suplex, which threw an enemy behind you and snared them, the finisher would then stun instead, which, as a side note, this didn't really feel like it fit the class at all. It made them feel more like a wrestler than more what we were going for, so probably not using this one in the future, but that's besides the point. And lastly, Meditation, which healed you based on the number of attacks you landed in your combo, and the finisher just doubled that healing amount. With the exception of Meditation, these were all damage abilities, which is fine, but say we want to add something more narrative to play with the Nomad's lore, like Create Light, which creates a small ball of light, which illuminates the area within 20 spaces. Even though this may fit the Nomad's lore, it doesn't really fit the kit because it ends up taking one of those 5 precious slots. Not to mention, figuring out a finisher for a narrative-based ability like that would be kind of weird. Doable, but weird. The solution to this problem was going to be allowing characters to multi-class more freely, allowing them to pick different abilities from other classes. Unfortunately though, allowing more multi-classing didn't actually allow for more roleplay based abilities because most of the other classes also suffered from this lack of ability diversity. Furthermore, say a Nomad was to pick the Fencer's Lunge ability, which didn't have a finisher, and because of this lack of crossplay, it didn't feel as interesting to pick. The heavy weapons in Assassin were also built like this, which could lead to more unfun multi-classing. So let's bring it all back and re-ask the question, why was this version of the game never released? Well, besides the fact that it wasn't finished, I just wasn't happy with it. While the changes felt cool and were better than the previous versions of the game, it still felt like more of the same. So, to fix this game, I think I'm going to have to be much more meticulous with my ability creation, along with maybe doing some very drastic changes. But that's for another day. If you'd like to learn more about Soul, please check out our horribly outdated website, soulrpg.com. We also have a Discord community. It's small right now, but small things are cute. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.